In Los Angeles, a playful challenge turned into a life-changing miracle. An 18-year-old young woman in a broken wheelchair, a billionaire mother in disbelief, and a humble mechanic with nothing but his hands and heart. What happened next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, Kind Soul Stories, for more inspiring stories. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get started. Jake Reynolds wiped the sweat from his brow, the harsh neon lights of his small Los Angeles garage casting long shadows across the concrete floor. At 35, he had spent most of his life repairing engines, fixing dents, and oil-stained hands that told the story of a man who worked tirelessly for every dollar. Tonight, like every night, the smell of grease and metal filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of old leather seats stacked in the corner. He had grown used to the quiet hum of machines, the rhythmic clanging of tools, and the occasional hiss of the air compressor, but tonight that normal routine was about to be interrupted. The bell above the garage door jingled softly, a sound Jake had heard hundreds of times before, but this time the sight that greeted him was unusual. A young woman sat in a wheelchair that had clearly seen better days. Its wheels wobbled dangerously, and the seat fabric was torn, exposing the fraying padding beneath. The sunlight streaming through the window highlighted every scratch, dent, and loose bolt, making it obvious that this chair was not only uncomfortable, but unsafe. Beside her stood a tall woman, dressed in an elegant designer suit, her expression sharp and calculating, yet faintly amused. Jake immediately recognized the aura of wealth and authority. This was no ordinary client. "Fix my wheelchair," the young woman said, her voice a mixture of playfulness and challenge. She leaned forward slightly, her smirk teasing yet daring. "And maybe I'll marry you someday." Jake blinked, momentarily stunned. The audacity of the statement hit him like a brick wall. He glanced at the woman beside her, her eyes wide and sharp, lips slightly parted in surprise. Victoria Lang, billionaire and mother, was observing every detail, clearly skeptical about whether this mechanic could rise to the challenge. Jake felt a mixture of shock, amusement, and an unshakable sense of responsibility. This wasn't just a joke somehow. Beneath the teasing, there was a plea, a hope that the young woman's life could be made better. Jake's mind raced. He had fixed plenty of cars, motorcycles, and even some home appliances, but a wheelchair, especially one that had been neglected and damaged for so long. He had no fancy tools or medical-grade parts, only the scraps and components he usually used for car repairs. But then his gaze fell on the young woman's eyes, bright, expectant, and full of trust. There was no malice, no games, only a desperate hope that someone would see her struggle and do something about it. Suddenly, the audacity of words faded, replaced by the clarity of purpose. Jake knew he couldn't let her down. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. "I'll make it work." The young woman's smirk widened slightly, while her mother's expression shifted from skepticism to curiosity. Jake had no idea how he would accomplish this yet. He didn't have a blueprint, a guide, or even the proper materials. All he had was determination, experience, and the knowledge that he had overcome challenges before, often with nothing but grit and patience. This would be his most important task, yet not a car, not a machine, but a life-changing gift for someone who needed it more than he could measure. The garage suddenly felt different, as if the air itself had thickened with expectation. The usual smells of oil, metal, and engine grease now mingled with something more profound. A quiet tension, the weight of responsibility, and the hint of hope. Jake examined the wheelchair carefully, noting the worn wheels, the loose bolts, and the torn seat fabric. Each flaw was a challenge, each broken part a puzzle. He rolled up his sleeves, flexed his hands, and set to work, mentally planning the steps he would need to take. He would need to reinforce the frame, replace or repair the wheels, and create a comfortable, secure seating area for Emma. Emma, the young woman in the wheelchair, watched silently. She wasn't demanding, nor was she fidgeting with impatience. Her eyes followed every movement Jake made, reflecting a mix of curiosity, disbelief, and cautious optimism. She had lived long enough to know that promises often fell short and help was rare. But somehow, she felt that this man, Jake, was different. Perhaps it was the way he studied the wheelchair with respect, the way his hands hovered over each piece with care, or the quiet confidence that radiated from him. Despite the impossibility of the task, in her heart she allowed herself a spark of hope, fragile but persistent. Victoria Lang observed the scene from the doorway, her billionaire composure unchanged, yet there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She had encountered many skilled professionals in her life, from top engineers to elite designers, but the determination emanating from this mechanic was something raw, genuine, and unexpected. She could see it in the way he studied the wheelchair, traced the frame with calloused fingers, and muttered softly to himself, calculating, planning, imagining solutions. There was no hesitation, no doubt in his movements, only focus and commitment. It was a quality that money couldn't buy, and one that impressed her more than she expected. Hours passed as Jake mentally sketched out his plan, using scraps and materials. From his garage, the frame would need reinforcement. The wheels had to be balanced perfectly. The seat had to be replaced with something both strong and comfortable. He reviewed the challenges repeatedly, testing his assumptions, calculating tolerances, and envisioning how each component would work together. This wasn't just an exercise in mechanics, it was problem-solving at its most intense, blending creativity, intuition, and experience. He felt a strange mix of anxiety and excitement, the kind of pressure that reminded him why he loved a good challenge in the first place. Finally, Jake took a deep breath, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked at Emma. "I'm going to get this done," he said, his voice calm but resolute. Emma nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Victoria, still observing, crossed her arms, her expression softening slightly. In that quiet moment, the impossible didn't seem so far away. The journey was just beginning. But the seed of hope had been planted. Jake's ordinary hands were about to create something extraordinary. And for Emma, a new world of possibility was about to open. The garage smelled of metal, oil, and the faint tang of sweat. Jake Reynolds wiped his brow, eyes scanning the broken wheelchair before him. At 35, he was used to long hours, but this challenge was unlike any car repair he had ever undertaken. Emma Parker, 18, sat quietly in her damaged chair, her hands gripping the armrests tightly, anticipation shining in her eyes. The faint hum of the street outside was drowned by the rhythmic clanging of Jake's tools and the occasional hiss of the welding torch. Sparks flew with every weld, illuminating the dim room, casting long, dramatic shadows on the walls, giving the space an almost cinematic feel. Every night, Jake carefully examined the components of the wheelchair. The wheels were bent and rusted, the frame warped, and the seat shredded. He took a deep breath and began reshaping the metal with a hammer and welding torch. Each strike, each spark, carried not just skill but determination, a promise to Emma that she would soon roll smoothly again. His hands grew bruised and calloused, the smell of molten metal filling his nostrils, but he didn't stop. Victoria Lang, Emma's billionaire mother, occasionally peeked through the garage door, her mouth slightly agape, astonished at the focus and dedication pouring from this ordinary mechanic. Jake paused to inspect the frame, turning it carefully, listening for weaknesses, tapping areas with a small mallet to test for stability. Emma leaned forward slightly in her broken wheelchair, following every movement. There was awe in her expression, a mix of hope and disbelief. She had spent so long constrained by her chair that she had almost forgotten what freedom might feel like. Each weld and Adjustment was more than mechanical. It was an act of love and care. Victoria watched silently, her arms crossed, understanding that the impossible was slowly becoming possible before her eyes. He worked late into the night, the dim garage lights flickering above, reflecting off the polished surfaces of tools and parts. Jake's mind constantly calculated tolerances, measurements, and weight distribution. The brake system needed to be aligned perfectly. The wheels had to rotate smoothly. The seat had to support Emma comfortably without risk. Every detail mattered. He paused often, measuring, double-checking, and visualizing how each component would interact. Sweat dripped from his forehead, blending with the grime on his hands. Yet his resolve never wavered. He was committed to making this wheelchair more than functional. It had to be safe, strong, and beautiful. Days passed, then nights as Jake meticulously soldered, adjusted, and polished. Pieces that were once scrap began to transform into something cohesive, sturdy, and reliable. He replaced worn-out bearings, reinforced joints with extra welding, and layered the seat with soft yet durable padding. Emma occasionally tried to offer suggestions, pointing at a wheel or a bolt, and Jake smiled, appreciating her involvement. Victoria's occasional glances turned into fascination. She had seen many skilled workers, but none poured such patience, precision, and heart into a project that seemed impossible. Jake encountered setbacks, wheels that didn't align, metal that wouldn't bend as planned, and broken tools adding frustration. Yet with each obstacle he found a solution. He improvised with materials from his garage, old bicycle parts, car seat foam, shopping cart wheels. His hands were raw, sometimes bleeding from the relentless labor, but the thought of Emma rolling freely kept him going. Night after night he repeated the cycle: measure, cut, weld, test, adjust. Each spark from the welding torch seemed to carry hope, lighting up the dark garage like a beacon. Finally, after weeks of work, Jake stepped back and inspected the completed wheelchair. It was sturdy, polished, and safe. The wheels rolled smoothly, the brakes worked perfectly, and the seat supported comfortably. Emma's eyes widened as Jake rolled the chair toward her. Is this really mine?" she whispered, a mixture of disbelief and excitement in her voice. Jake smiled warmly, his hands still slightly shaky from exhaustion. "It's all yours," he said softly. Her laughter erupted, echoing through the garage, and for the first time in months, freedom felt tangible. Victoria stepped closer, her eyes moist with tears. Astonished at what Jake had achieved, she had come expecting a simple repair. Yet here was a wheelchair that surpassed medical expectations, built entirely by an ordinary mechanic. Emma carefully transferred into the new chair and began rolling it back and forth, her grin uncontainable. Jake watched her, a profound sense of fulfillment settling in his chest. It wasn't just about a wheelchair, it was about restoring dignity, hope, and independence to a young woman whose life had been limited by circumstance for far too long. As Emma spun slightly in her chair, she laughed and exclaimed, "I can move so easily now. Thank you, Jake." The mechanic's heart swelled with pride. Weeks of sleepless nights, blistered hands, and relentless effort had culminated in this moment. Victoria's admiration was palpable, and she couldn't hide her awe at Jake's dedication. The transformation wasn't just in the wheelchair, but in Emma's life, and the hope that radiated from her. Smile was priceless. For Jake, this was a triumph that went beyond mechanics. It was a testament to human compassion, skill, and perseverance. The morning sun streamed into Jake Reynolds' small garage in Los Angeles, illuminating the polished surfaces of his latest creation. Emma Parker, 18, sat carefully in her new wheelchair, testing its balance and maneuverability with tentative movements at first. As she rolled forward, then spun gently, her laughter filled the room, rich and uninhibited. For the first time in years, she felt the freedom of movement that her broken chair had denied her. Jake stood nearby, hands on his hips, watching with quiet pride. the faint traces of sweat and grime still on his face, a testament to weeks of relentless labor. Victoria Lang, standing at the doorway, couldn't hide her astonishment. The billionaire businesswoman had seen innovations and engineering feats before, but nothing quite like this. A humble mechanic, using only scraps, old bicycle wheels, and discarded car seats, had created a wheelchair that performed beyond any expectation. She wiped a tear from her cheek, moved closer, and finally spoke, her voice soft but filled with awe. "Jake, this is incredible," she whispered. Emma's face lit up further, her excitement contagious, as she demonstrated the smooth turning of the wheels and the perfect balance of the chair. Jake's eyes scanned the room, taking in the chaos of tools, metal parts, and scraps that had once been useless, but now formed the foundation of freedom. Each weld, each bolt, each polished wheel represented countless hours of thought, patience, and sheer determination. He felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond monetary gain or recognition. It was the joy of seeing someone's life transformed by his own hands. Emma's laughter and delighted movements were the ultimate reward, echoing in the garage like a melody of hope and triumph. Victoria's admiration turned into action. She stepped forward, offering Jake an opportunity he had never dreamed possible. "I want to sponsor you," she said, her tone both formal and heartfelt. "You have a gift, Jake, and the world deserves to see it. Let's create more wheelchairs. Give more children the chance to move freely." Jake's eyes widened, the enormity of her offer sinking in. This was more than gratitude. It was a chance to expand his impact, to turn a single act of compassion into a movement that could change countless lives. Emma, catching wind of the conversation, spun around in her chair, delight radiating from her face. "I can go anywhere now," she exclaimed, the words bubbling with pure joy. The garage, once a place of work and toil, now resonated with happiness and celebration. Jake approached her, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. "And this is just the beginning," he said softly, brushing back a strand of her hair. She beamed, understanding that her own transformation was a part of something greater, an inspiring story of skill, heart, and resilience. As news of Jake's achievements spread, neighbors, local media, and eventually national outlets flocked to his garage to witness the miracle firsthand. Photographers captured Emma spinning, her laughter contagious, and reporters marveled at the ingenuity and care evident in every inch of the wheelchair. Social media erupted with praise for the mechanic who had turned a playful challenge into a life-changing reality. Comments ranged from astonishment at his skill to admiration for his determination, with thousands inspired by the story of how compassion and creativity can overcome the impossible. Jake, watching the media attention unfold, felt a mixture of humility and pride. He had started with nothing but scraps, tools, and a promise to help someone in need. Yet, now he saw how far a single act of dedication could travel, touching lives. Beyond his imagination, Victoria remained by his side, impressed not just by his talent, but by his integrity and character. Emma, once constrained by limitations, now navigated the garage freely, her joy a living proof of the miracle they had created together. By evening, the garage had transformed once again from a workspace cluttered with tools to a symbol of hope, determination, and achievement. Jake, Victoria, and Emma shared a quiet moment together, reflecting on how an audacious challenge had turned into something monumental. The laughter of Emma, the pride in Victoria's eyes, and the quiet satisfaction on Jake's face told a story that needed no words, that with heart, skill, and perseverance, even the most ordinary hands can perform extraordinary miracles. For all three, life had changed forever, their bond strengthened by the shared experience of creating hope and joy from what once seemed impossible.